Hello everyone, my name is Michaela, and this is my final applied assignment presentation. This project helped me understand inclusion in a way that I never had before, not just from research, but through a real conversation with an educator who works with students with disabilities every day. I'm glad to share what I learned, not just about inclusion, but about access, equity, stereotypes, and the systems that either support or limit students in the school settings. For an overview, I will first be explaining why I chose the topic and how I prepared for the interview. I'll review key special education tools and terms. I'll share what I learned from the interviews and how it connects to our course readings and research. And I'll end with questions that I have now that I've learned more about inclusion. The focus of my project is how educators support students with disabilities in inclusive classrooms. I chose this topic because I've interacted with children with disabilities before, but I never realized how much responsibility, training, planning, and collaboration is required for true inclusion to happen in schools. I want to understand inclusion from the teacher's point of view, not just the students or from a legal perspective. The reason why is because teachers are often the ones that are expected to make the inclusion work, even when the systems don't fully support them. For this assignment, I interviewed a certified educator who works directly with students with developmental and learning disabilities in a school setting. I asked 10 open-ended questions about support systems, behavior, planning, collaboration, barriers, stereotypes, equity, and what successful inclusion looks like. The interview lasted about 20 minutes and gave me insight that goes beyond what I read in research. I got to hear what inclusion looks like in real time. Before interviewing him, I reviewed a few course readings along with some individual research. For the course materials, I used Peter's Inclusion as an Educational Human Right and Peter's Inequality and Barriers in Disability Education. Both of these gave me a structure for explaining inclusion as a human right and focused on education inequality and structural barriers. For our research, I looked up the federal law IDEA, which is Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. I also looked at the 2023 National Center for Learning Disabilities report that helped me recognize the difference between what inclusion should look like and what it often looks like in reality. Before this assignment, I understood inclusion in a basic way. Students with and without disabilities learning together. But I didn't realize how much planning, staffing, and collaboration it takes to make that a real thing. I had interacted with children with disabilities, yet I didn't see the behind the scenes work of how individualized education programs, behavior intervention plans, 504 plans are created, implemented, and adjusted day to day. I also didn't know how much time and administrative support teachers needed to prevent burnout. Going into the interview, I wanted to learn how educators adapt instruction, interpret and follow plans, coordinate with families and specialists, and keep the focus on participation and belonging, not just performance. This is where my understanding shifted from inclusion as placement to inclusion as supported practice. With that, I'm going to share what I learned in the interview and what inclusion looks like in the classroom, when it works, and what gets in the way. This is the evidence that I provided. I completed an interview, and the educator shared examples of what inclusion looks like, when it works, and what it looks like when it fails. One of the biggest things I noticed is that his experience confirmed what we read in this course, that inclusion on paper is not the same as inclusion in practice. The interview gave me the behind-the-scenes reality of what it takes for a student to actually be supported in the classroom, not just to be placed. So some new things that I learned in key terms were the IEP, which is an individualized education program. So this is a written legal plan that lists goals, services, and accommodation for a student with disability. The purpose is to make sure that learning is individualized and legally protected. The next tool is behavior intervention plans, which is called a BIP. A plan that learns proactive strategies, supports, and responses for students with behavior-related needs. The purpose of this is to help reduce behavior challenges without punishment. I also learned about a 504 plan, which is a Section 504 accommodation plan. This provides disability accommodations for students who do not need special education. This ensures equal access under civil rights law. The IDEA, Individuals with Disability Education Act, is a federal law that guarantees students with disabilities the right to a free, appropriate public education, as to protect access and require schools to provide these services. I learned some support staff roles as well. They have a paraprofessional, special educator, behavior specialist, and admin. Inclusive is a team effort, not a solo job. I thought inclusion mostly meant having students with disabilities learn in the same classroom as their peers. What I learned is that placement is not the same as participation. The interviewee said inclusion only works when trained staff, behavior supports, accommodations, and planning time are in place. Otherwise, the student is present but not supported. This directly connects to Peters, who argues that inclusion is not about location, but about belonging, access, and support. Inclusion is not automatic. It is something that has to be built, supported, funded, and protected. IEPs and accommodations must be followed daily, not just written, and they also need to make adjustments to these plans as needed to help the children grow while learning in an inclusive environment. While getting an understanding of what equity really looks like, the interviewee said that IEPs or 504 plans exist, but sometimes they often fail because teachers don't always have the time, training, or support to implement them. This means that a student is physically included but may not be receiving an equitable education. This connects to Peters' 2008 research, who explains that inequality doesn't happen because of the student's ability. It happens because schools lack the resource to support them fairly. Barriers can also include staffing shortages, lack of training, and teacher burnout. Students may also be removed from classrooms based on their capacity and not their ability, which again is not conducive to an inclusive classroom. After the interview, I got an understanding that access is something that's active but also not guaranteed. The IDEA legally promises access to education, but the access only becomes real when schools have the people, tools, and training to make it happen daily. The interviewee said, access isn't just letting the students into the classroom, but making sure they can participate meaningfully. This matches the NCLD 2003 data showing that 1 in 5 students have learning disabilities, but most schools are not fully prepared to support them. So access is not just a civil right. It is something that requires ongoing action and not just legal language. Some of the examples that he gave in the interview for like assistance tools are fidget spinners, modified plans, and sensory support, like removing a child that may have needs assistance with like focusing. He would move away distractions for them to kind of get them to focus on the work, and then kind of slowly include them back into the general population to kind of help them with social anxiety and things like that. Some things that the interviewee mentioned are stereotypes and cultural factors that are included in that prevents inclusive classrooms. He mentioned how much attitudes and assumptions affect inclusion. He said some teachers see a diagnosis and already believe that students will be difficult, unmotivated, or too much work. He also talked about cultural and language differences. Sometimes behaviors or communication styles are misinterpreted as a disability. This connects to what we learned about ableism and deficient thinking. The idea that disability is a problem instead of a part of human diversity helped me understand how bias can exclude a student just as quickly as a locked door. And sometimes the most damaging barriers are invisible. He also mentioned that with having these barriers, it causes exclusion for the child. Because when the adult treats the student differently, then the other children in the classroom will do the same thing. So because of these stereotypes, it pushes the student into isolation and exclusion, which again is not helpful in an inclusive classroom environment. Some strategies and solutions that I asked him was, when I asked what would make inclusion work better, he didn't say better students, he said better systems. He said schools need more trained staff, more time for teachers to plan and collaborate, more administrative support, and more funding for behavior and instructional tools. This is supported by Peters and NCLD. Inclusion fails not because students can't learn, but because schools aren't equipped to support how they learn. So now I see solutions not as fixing the child, but fixing the structure around the child. Definitely would help if more teachers had IEP training and planning, especially because he stated in the interview that sometimes the teachers can have more than one child in the class that has an IEP plan or that has behavioral issues. And because it's only one teacher and maybe one paraprofessional in the class, it doesn't give them the opportunity to really give individualized assistance to each child that needs it. So with hiring more staff and being able to support those students properly, it would allow for the classroom to be able to be less disrupted because so many things are going on because of how many children are in each class. So this assignment did leave me with a few questions that I didn't have before, which are, how can schools realistically fund enough staff to fully support inclusive classrooms? How can families from different cultural backgrounds be more supported during the IEP process? And how can future teachers receive better training so